Welcome to the official Lawyer Minds podcast. Lawyer Minds is an ever-growing ecosystem for all the resources modern lawyers need. As the official Lawyer Minds podcast, we'll discuss everything from the latest happenings on the website to industry news. Get ready. Here we go. It's time to dive into the minds of successful lawyers. Here are your hosts, Ted Thomas and Mike Campbell.
Mike, you've been involved in MATA for a few years, right?
I have.
Why is it important to be involved in your state trial lawyers association?
Oh, I mean, that's where you can have the most impact in making sure that your clients continue to have access to the courtroom. And, you know, that's just not a phrase. It's actually meaningful because in the past 15 years here in the state of Missouri, we've watched year after year, the state legislature attack our clients' rights and ability to go to the courtroom to get, punitive damages. That was something that passed this year, and our guest will talk about, or med mal. So we get med mal inquiries, and we have to tell people we're sorry that we can't help you because this was a case 15 years ago is not a case now. I mean, it's the same thing that's happened in Texas. And any host of issues, as you know, where we can make, I think, our greatest impact as trial lawyers is in the courtroom and also in our Capitol Hall, talking with legislators, building relationships, and volunteering with our state trial lawyers associations.
You know, I wish there was a way to communicate to the public, what these associations do. And the fact that, the lawyers that I hold lawyers that are involved in these organizations up on a pedestal to some degree, because it's not just about fighting for our clients in the courtroom and litigating cases and making arguments for them there. There's no pecuniary benefit to us spending hours and hours in the Capitol and sleeping in the Capitol to make sure that our clients have the rights to go to court in the first place. And, I just wish all of our clients would know, and the public would know, when they're going to pick a lawyer, pick one of them that fights for you even before you're a client and long after you're a client.
Right. I mean, that's exactly. And I have that talk with my clients, and I ask them if they'll come down to the, I'll say, when this case is over, will you help me? Will you help other people like you? Because we may not get full justice in your case, but there's a chance you can talk with some of these state representatives or senators and tell them your story. And maybe that'll move the needle a little bit and rolling back some of the, stupid, harmful pieces of legislation they passed. And I remember a few years ago, I was asked by a Boy Scout to speak to the Boy Scouts of America local chapter or something about how the state capitol works. And they were like, okay, tell us about lobbyists. And I was like, well, on one side you have, very powerful interests. And I tried to sort of make it, fairly simple. These are pretty educated kiddos, but they caught on. They were like, so who's on the other side? Who protects consumers? I was like, well, I mean, you have AARP, but then you also have the trial lawyers. And that's a God's honest truth. You go in the state capitol, you go to a hearing committee, someone's in there talking about there's a bill up to try to screw over, an elderly couple who got duped by a car lender, and every powerful industry lobbyist is in there in favor of passing this bill that's going to continue to screw over elderly people. And then you got one trial lawyer on the other side who's going to testify against it.
And then theoretically, government should be. So, but then, the people are deciding who's going into government. So, I won't go into the state, but there's certain states that have attorneys general from certain parties, and those attorneys generals have units under them that are specifically responsible for consumer protection and
That's
for
right.
consumer advocacy in all sorts of respects. And then, an AG gets elected who believes that you shouldn't do that, there is no consumer protection, that, the free market economy means businesses can do whatever the heck they want to do and people can just not buy their products.
That's right.
And it doesn't work that way. So, thank God for, people like our next guest, and the state associations to go to the capitals and stand up for consumers and victims of negligence.
Well, one final point I'll make here is every client who comes into my office, I'll say 95% of clients who come to my office, you may have heard this before, Tad. Now, I didn't spill hot coffee on myself to try to get this, or this is a legitimate case, and it's like you don't have to convince me.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, the people who were voted in the last election cycle and the election cycle before that, and here are some of your state representatives, have decided that you don't get your day in court. And that's not because your case, there's no exception for your case in the law, right? There's no caveat for, this case is really legitimate. There is just a blanket cap on damages for all med-mal cases, making them nearly impossible to take.
So talk about our next guest.
Yeah, sure. So Brett Emison is he's a former president of the Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys. He's a guy who is sort of a part of a legacy in the state of Missouri. Bob Langdon and Ken Emison, two really well-known trial lawyers out of Lexington, Missouri, and Kansas City, Missouri. Kent is Brett's dad, so Brett's been in and around the profession for most of his life and carries those same values we were talking about and the passion to help his clients, not just in the courthouse, but also on the Capitol steps.
So here's Brett Emison.
All right. And we're here with Brett Emison. Hey, Brett, how are you doing? And tell us a little bit about your practice.
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me on. My name is Brett Emison, and I work with Ken Emison and Bob Langdon at Langdon and Emison in Kansas City, Missouri. And we started out as your typical small town general practice firm when I was growing up, probably 30, 35 years ago. And in the late 80s and early 90s, Kent and Bob, I think somewhat mistakenly, took on an auto product liability case against General Motors. And they got a real nice result in the early 90s. And they started getting involved in groups like AAJ and AIEG and talking to folks around the country, and really grew that from your typical small town general practice to a nationwide auto products liability practice in the 90s and early 2000s, trying cases with just about everybody and just about anywhere. And the firm continued to grow. I grew up in and around the firm, obviously. I think I've done every job there, from sweeping the floors and trimming the bushes outside to making copies to now being one of the lead trial lawyers on our trial teams, which gives me an interesting perspective about law practice and lawyer life. But, about, now 10, 12 years ago, right before the automakers declared bankruptcy, we started seeing some of that writing on the wall and started diversifying the practice to other areas. We still do, I think, probably most of our work in auto products defects, but, do any kind of catastrophic injury case, trucking cases, medical cases, device cases, some mass torts even, and still do our practice nationwide.
Yeah, and I think we see some verdicts coming from partners at your firm, either it's in Virginia, Chicago, or down in Texas. You guys really do have a national practice.
It's pretty amazing. I know we've handled cases as far west as Hawaii, Bob Langdon tried a case in Burlington, Vermont a couple years ago. It's all over the place.
Yeah, sure. Was that Hawaii one? Was that just like a minor impact soft tissue case that you guys just had to get involved with?
It's funny, and my dad actually got the call on that. And it was a pretty serious auto defect case on Maui, but he volunteered to take every one of those depositions, appeared at every one of those court hearings. He really took one for the team there.
Kent is just, I've always heard he's willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good.
Named partner prerogative. That's
So, Brett, you were the president of the Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys. You're a guy who has grown up in the organization, literally grown up in the organization. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've seen a state like Missouri evolve with its policy ideas towards plaintiffs, trials, tort reform? I'll put that phrase in quotes.
With as far as the political pendulum has swung in Missouri now, being primarily a red state, and I say that I still think we're fairly purple. Certainly in our state house, in the House and in the Senate, it's very, very heavily Republican, super majorities in both of those chambers. But a lot of that has to do with the political gerrymandering that goes on in the process, and sort of stacking the deck that way. If you look at the general electorate, Missouri is really a lot like the broader United States. We've got an East Coast in St. Louis, a West Coast in Kansas City, with large conservative pockets in rural Missouri in between. But population-wise, it runs pretty even. It's just in the state house, yes, that pendulum swung in really about 2004 and continues to swing rightward that way. But growing up in and around MATA, I am old enough to remember being in the Capitol, serving as an intern when I was in law school, and it really was a Democratic-controlled majority, and pretty heavily so. And we didn't really have to worry about strong tort reform. The Missouri Chamber has always been a real powerhouse in the Capitol. They're one of the main lobbying organizations, and so we were always fighting, but really not like we were this year and in the last 10 years or so. And in 2004, the pendulum really swung, and the state houses flipped, and we got a Republican governor. And in 2005, they passed a really wide sweeping tort reform package that included caps on med mal, changes to joint and several liability, venue reform, really limiting where plaintiffs could file their cases. And since then, they've just been chipping away year after year after year at various, quote unquote, tort reforms that are slowly but surely restricting the ability of Missouri families to hold wrongdoers accountable. And after 15 years of that, what I've been telling people this year after serving as the president is there's really no quote unquote small tort bills left. They're all major changes, and all the proposals that we saw this year that we're going to see next year are going to be really major changes that restrict the Seventh Amendment.
Sure.
Brett, I know in Indiana, so we're right across the river, when they passed their medical malpractice tort reform, we saw, I guess it did what Indiana wanted. They wanted more doctors, and it seemed like every bad doctor from Louisville opened offices across the river and, started practicing there. And we saw an uptick in calls on medical malpractice cases. And we had to tell, all the clients, look, the reason you went to Indiana was a mistake. And, now you have no redress. Are you all seeing the effect of that in the medical malpractice area?
It is. It's hard, and it's funny. I remember, I'm forgetting which year it was. I don't know if it's 2008, 2010. There was a big push in the state of Illinois for medical malpractice caps and medical malpractice reform. And they were running ads in Illinois saying all the Illinois doctors were running to Missouri because we did have med mal caps even at that time. And in Missouri, they wanted more tort reform. And they were running ads in Missouri saying all the doctors were leaving Missouri going to Kansas because they had more stringent caps. And I remember going to an AAJ event out in Arizona, and they were running ads saying all the Arizona doctors were fleeing to California because they had state med mal caps. And I just figured all the doctors would one day end up in the Pacific Ocean just taking all these terrible states. But
Sure.
we don't do much med malpractice. There are a small pocket of really good med mal lawyers in Missouri, but I don't know how many times I've had people call and say, we just can't take your case because the state Senate and the state House have decided you shouldn't have any redress, and they need to protect bad doctors over innocent families.
Yeah, and I know from my experience, those are cases where someone was injured and the conduct was pretty terrible, but the limitations that we have here just make it nearly impossible to bring some of those cases.
And our issue with med mal caps is interesting because we have a right to jury trial in our state constitution that says the right to trial heretofore enjoyed, meaning back in 1820, shall not be infringed and shall remain inviolate. And so our state Supreme Court struck down the damage caps in negligence cases. It upheld the cap in wrongful death cases because the wrongful death claim was a creature of statute. So we had a position for a while where if you were just hurt, you were uncapped, but if you were killed, you were capped. And then the state legislature went ahead and passed new caps anyway and ignored the Constitution again. And that has yet to be litigated and sorted out.
Right, you're very involved in AAJ as well, and from the standpoint of a president of a state trial lawyers association, talk about what you think the relationship is or should be between AAJ and each of the state associations.
Well, I think ours has been strong, and I hope it continues to get stronger. And I think it should be a strong relationship between every state TLA and AAJ. AAJ looks out for everybody, and I tell folks in my organization, MATA is literally the only organization that stands up and fights for Missouri families against all of these pro-corporate business tort reform associations. And when I go down and testify on a bill, it's 20 different industry lobbyists testifying for these tort reform bills, and then it's me on the other side. And that's it. And AAJ is doing that for us at the federal level. And I think it's hard sometimes to talk to a small town lawyer who does a primarily general practice and never gets to federal court, never tries something out of the state on why they should care about AAJ. But they need to care about AAJ because the changes to federal rules trickle down to state rules. The regulations governing trucking companies and truck drivers trickle down to our claimants. It's incredibly important to support AAJ in its mission.
So if I'm a new lawyer, let's say in Indiana or even Missouri, and I'm looking at a very red state or purple state, and I'm like, well, there's not much I can do to help my clients get access to the courthouse. You've been in the trenches. You've been doing this for a long time. What would you tell them?
Listen, there's a whole lot we can do. And, our leadership, Sarah Shute, who's our executive director and our EC, when I gave sort of my outgoing virtual speech on Zoom at our last board meeting, I am just in awe of our executive director, our staff, and our lobby team. We have the absolute best staff, lobbyists, and board members and executive committee that I know about. And looking at the folks on our executive committee that are going to be presidents of our organization over the next 10 years, the leadership there is just incredible. And it's really a testament to their hard work and continuing hard work that we have as frankly, as good a shot as we have, because it could really be a lot worse. And, I talked about the tort reform that went through back in 2004 and 2005. And even before then, we have started developing relationships with Republicans because not only do we have to, we should, because our issues are conservative issues. It's easy to talk about the right to a jury trial. It's easy to talk about concepts of accountability and responsibility with conservatives because that's what conservatives believe. And Republicans aren't the enemy, and conservatives aren't the enemy. It's the chamber lobbying groups that put profits, frankly, ahead of everything else. And if we can just unmarry certain conservatives with the chamber type lobbyists and support, there can be real inroads. And all that takes is a lot of time and a lot of effort developing those relationships so that when you go talk to lawmakers about this, they have someone they can trust to give them the straight story. And we have made, I think, some pretty good inroads that way, and developing some really good relationships with some really, really strong conservatives in our state House and state Senate.
So you've served on the MATA Executive Committee for 10 years, and you've been involved with the organization beyond that. And you've always, I see at every AAJ event and AIEG event, and you're constantly busy. What are you going to do with your time now that the MATA presidency is over?
You know, it's going to be interesting. I'm both scared of that and I'm looking forward to that. You can tell I like being involved, and I'm already getting the FOMO, the fear of missing out, when you put this much time and effort into an organization. It really is, it's a blessing and a curse to have to walk away and to try to walk away. So it's a good thing they kind of kicked me out, or I'd probably overstay my welcome.
You and Tad can start like a support group here in a couple of years when Tad is through with AAJ exec.
Right.
I'm sure Brett's like me. It's people are already lining up asking for parts of our time.
Hey, yeah, when you're through with this, yeah.
So it's organizations appreciate people who carry a laboring oar, and I know Brett has been carrying a laboring oar at all sorts of organizations and levels for years. So there won't be any shortage of people asking for his time soon.
That I'm sure of, and really. It's important work. We don't get into this line of work to sit on the sidelines.
Right.
If people become trial lawyers because they like to get in and they like to fight, and they like to fight for the little guy. And when somebody's future is on the line, I don't know about you, but I want to be the one standing in that courtroom fighting for them.
Right. And this is not just trial lawyers talking about not being able to work up cases. These are human faces and average Missourians who are harmed and not having the ability to go to the courthouse affects everything, affects their lives, our lives, everything. And I think you have a story about, if you don't mind sharing it, about the Hyvee prescription case. Can you talk about that, or is that something that you
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. And I was going to say that's an incredibly good point. We represent people in just the worst tragedies in their life, and we really do give them hope. And we can't put their life back the way it was, but we can give them options. We can give them security, and we can give them the knowledge that a wrongdoer has been held responsible. And we have just incredible stories to tell, not about us, but about the people we help and what they've gone through, and why the Seventh Amendment and access to justice is important. And so this year, the number one priority for the Missouri Senate leadership was to pass a punitive damages bill, to make it harder to impose punitive damages on wrongdoers who intentionally harm others. So, we have infrastructure problems here in Missouri. We have education problems here in Missouri. We've got, we could have tax reform, other things, but the Senate's number one priority was protecting wrongdoers from punitive damages. And so one of the stories that I was sharing with our state senators was a family that we helped, the Euler family. Their mother and grandma, Joyce Euler, had been in the hospital for some heart issues, was released, sent home, and was prescribed some heart medication to aid in her recovery at home. So the doctor's nurse calls it into her pharmacy, gives the prescription over the phone. That was the first problem. You're not supposed to do that. The pharmacy tech took the prescription. That's not supposed to happen. And this was at a Hyvee, which is a local grocery store chain here in Missouri. Hyvee grocery store pharmacy, and the pharmacy tech had recently been promoted from the floral department to now take prescriptions. And by all accounts, she was a very good floral department worker, very good florist, and not so good of a pharmacy tech. And she entered the wrong prescription. It sounded the same, but she wrote down a prescription for a cancer drug, a chemotherapy drug. And she wrote it down in a dose that was going to be fatal. Entered that into the computer. The computer didn't have the system checks, the red flags, the electronic stops to prevent that prescription from going through. The pharmacist printed the prescription, looked at it, in his deposition testimony, knew that it was a fatal dose, but went ahead and gave it to her husband, who had gone to the pharmacy to pick up the prescription. Also didn't provide any counseling instructions about the drug or how to take the drug or anything like that, just gave him the bag and sent him home. And she took the drug, and a few days later started experiencing some stomach symptoms, ulcer symptoms, and went to the doctor, and they discovered that she was being poisoned by this chemotherapy drug. And the god-awful thing about this is that once you start exhibiting the physical symptoms, it's too late to do anything about it.
Wow.
It cannot be reversed. And this poor woman died an agonizing death a few days later due to this problem. So another law firm took that to trial, asked the court to impose punitive damages, and the court refused. And so then our firm got involved. Mike Manners is one of our partners. He was a trial judge in Jackson County in Kansas City for 13 years and does a lot of really high quality appellate work, and came in to help on the appeal to try and get the case remanded so that they could seek punitive damages, and was successful. And so right before the new trial on punitive damages, that case settled. But in talking about the importance of punitive damages, we really wanted to put a face on what that meant to families. And this punitive damages bill, I think is going to affect cases like this, where there's really egregious conduct, where the systems were in place. And the kicker is when they deposed the Hyvee corporate representative and asked if they'd made any changes, he said no, that they hadn't made any changes to prevent this from happening to an innocent family again. And the Court of Appeals said that was one of the main factors in remanding the case for a new trial on punitive damages. But it's so important to put actual human faces on what these arbitrary policy decisions that happen in state capitals across the country will do.
So then, rather than addressing infrastructure problems in healthcare and all of the other things that are pressing amongst, in a state that a state legislature has to address, the few and far between cases that are so egregious like that one, where without the jury system to hold someone accountable, without the jury system to, force change, the legislature thought that it was best to protect people that knowingly give a lethal drug to someone and say nothing about
it. Right. I mean, and that's the thing. Who are they there to protect? And the bill that ended up passing made changes to the punitive damages standard to make it harder to deter and prevent this kind of important conduct from happening again. It also made changes to our Merchandising Practices Act during a pandemic to make it easier for companies to defraud senior citizens and Missouri families. and that was the number one priority of the Senate. There was an all-night filibuster to get that bill through. And it's just amazing that turns out to be the number one priority.
We've got hope though, Brett. I mean, we've got optimism. We've got a lot of new lawyers coming aboard that are going to hopefully carry some of that laboring ore. And could you spread a little bit of an optimistic message, about
sure.
building relationships and everything like that on, to end the podcast?
Yeah, no, and I don't mean to be doom and gloom. That was our big battle this year, and there's a big battle every year.
It is. You are justified in being doom. I wake up every morning thinking, what's the legislature going to do today to make our life miserable? But yeah, sorry.
I tell people that all it takes is a handful of principled Democrats and principled Republicans to come together on these issues and to start building that coalition. We've been in that process for the last decade or decade and a half, and we are continuing that process. So, in the primaries, we supported a lot of conservatives because, like I said, our values are conservative values. And there are some conservatives that are finally starting to recognize that and starting to push back on the chamber. And we are getting more lawyers, frankly, in the Senate, which is really important to be able to have someone who has been in the well and understands the terminology, understands, the ripple effect of how these changes affect people and can talk about that in committee hearings and with their colleagues and then on the floor. So we're going to be getting new attorneys from the Kansas City area, from the St. Louis area. And I think that's going to be helpful just to help articulate the problem to their colleagues.
Yeah. And we're going to be there to look for those opportunities, to build those relationships, and everyone has to pitch in to keep the fight going.
There's real basic things people can do. I tell everybody, get to know your state representative and your state senator. It's important to know them. They're down there making policy, and they want to get to know you. I mean, our attorneys are small business owners. They're leaders in their community. They have a lot of clients who end up being constituents for these lawmakers. Yep. And it's important to get to know them, even if you don't agree 100% politically. Get to know them and do the things that we're talking about. Talk to them about these issues, introduce them to your clients, and explain how pending legislation are going to affect these families.
And I've had conversations with state reps, and they've asked me about specific language and have asked me, what exactly does this mean? And I've just had coffee with them and said, well, I think this is kind of what it means. And I appreciate you trusting me to go through it with you. And that can happen with just anyone. There's nothing special about that.
Absolutely.
Brett, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate your time. And thanks for everything that you've done with MATA and you continue to do with MATA and AAJ. So
that's right.
Look forward to seeing you in person at a convention soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Mike, since you're in Missouri, it's exciting to know, not only that you guys have people like Brett, but it sounds like you've got a lot of attorneys, involved in MATA that are coming up and coming through the organization that are tremendous leaders that are going to carry on the good work of the organization.
Yeah. And it all starts, with new lawyers getting involved and learning and standing on the shoulders of giants, of people who come before them, just as Brett is standing on the shoulders of his dad. The new lawyers are coming in the organization and standing on the shoulders of people like Brett, who have basically said, okay, you know what? I've carried the baton for the 100 yards that I was supposed to carry it, get out there and carry it the next 100. And so you got to get involved. If you're a new lawyer, if you're been practicing for 10 years and just said, this is enough of this nonsense. I want to get involved. We need you.
Yeah. And it's not just joining, it's joining and like you said, getting involved. It's more than that, so it's, going to the meetings, volunteering to talk to your legislator, volunteering to go to the Capitol, to, go to legislative meetings, to testify, to, talk about your client stories. It's, we're always reaching out because, who better to tell a story about why forced arbitration is a bad thing than a client who lost a loved one and was unable to get justice because they had to go into a confidential hearing with an arbitrator that nobody will ever know about. And,
Yep. I mean, this is, smell test stuff. And what I mean by that is if you like coffee, grab a coffee with your local representative and explain to him why some of the things that the lobbyists are trying to get passed don't pass the smell test. It wouldn't be something that they'd want to limit for their own spouse or for their community members, whether that's a right to have your day in court and get beyond arbitration, or be able to get compensated the full value for the injury that, a person has suffered. These are things that are pretty simple to understand.
What if I'm not a donor to my legislator? Maybe they're a different party. Should I still call them up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is, I've been involved with Democrat politics, and most people know that here in the state of Missouri for a long time. Last election cycle, I helped a Republican judicial candidate every day because, I felt like he was going to be very fair in the courtroom. I didn't think that he was going to give me any special favors, and I don't think that he was going to give any special favors to people who donated to him. These are people who just kind of want to know, from my experience, that they can rely upon you for advice or for guidance if needed. And so you don't have to donate. You just have to be able to sit down and have a cup of coffee or, build that relationship.
Yeah. Because they don't know about our issues unless we talk to them about our issues. And,
they don't.
We always talk about how when, a particular bill comes up, unless they hear from our clients and hear from their constituents, they don't know that bill's a problem. They may think it sounds great on the surface because that's what they've been told. So, without actually going in and talking to them and telling them why this is a bad idea, they may never know.
You see their eyes light up whenever we're in there testifying at the Capitol or speaking with them one-on-one. And, I always joke that, hey, before I came in the office, I pushed my fangs up so you couldn't see them. Mm-hmm. But when I tell them a story or two about how there's a real world impact on the things that they're doing, first of all, they don't buy it initially because they're right. Like, that can't be true.
Oh, this is good.
This is a good thing. Yeah. My caucus has told me this is a good thing. This has to be a good thing. And you're like, yeah, except for you got an 80-year-old lady who got swindled and now won't have an ability to hold those people responsible.
And if you can't hold them responsible, then there's nothing to prevent them from doing it again.
Right. And, my thing is my parents were small business owners. My stepdad was a conservative Republican general contractor. My mom ran businesses all over the state of Missouri. And I tell them every single time, the people that they were, most fearful of weren't like big competitors. They were fearful of people who were screwing over other people and then getting unfair advantage. Right. And that is what's happening when you basically pass these bills. Brett talked about the Merchandise Practicing Act. Every state sort of has this General Consumer Protection Act. When you don't have things like that, you're inviting bad businesses to do bad things.
Yep.
Period.
Well, Mike, great podcast. Good to see you again.
You too, man. You're looking real sharp today. I should have threw a jacket on. You and Brett are just,
the man behind the scenes with the big red beard tells me how to dress. And so,
I was talking
I'm just doing what I'm told.
I was talking to Brett before yesterday before we got on the podcast, and he was like, "So this is going to be on video, right?" And I said, "Yeah, and there'll be something that Ryan finds, whether it's how I dressed or something I said." So He
doesn't complain to me, Mike, because I do what he says. So maybe if you're a better listener.
I'm not a good listener. So, well, brother, it's been a good podcast, and next time.
Sounds good. We'll see you later.
See ya.
That wraps another episode of the official Lawyer Minds podcast. Please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Explore the other content Lawyer Minds has to offer and engage with us on social media. Your feedback on the show and ideas for future shows is always welcomed. See you next time.